How do you sink an enemy ship with a weapon that isn't even real? During the darkest days of World War II, British submarines began firing fake torpedoes, dummies with no explosives, no warheads, nothing that could actually blow up. And yet, somehow, these phantom torpedoes still managed to destroy German warships. This isn't science fiction. It's one of the strangest and most brilliant secrets of the underwater war. A deception so powerful that fear itself became a weapon. In the early 1940s, the war at sea was a nightmare of numbers, metal, and risk. Every convoy heading to Britain was a lifeline, carrying food, fuel, and hope across an ocean the German Navy wanted to block. Propaganda made submarines look like silent hunters, but the reality was grim. They were cramped, noisy, and dangerous. Air inside stank of diesel and fear. The men knew that a single malfunction, a wrong decision, or a stray depth charge could end everything in seconds. But worse than fear was failure. And that haunted the Royal Navy more than anything else. By 1941, British submarine crews faced a humiliating truth. Their torpedoes, the very weapons meant to defend their nation, often didn't work. Some ran too deep, harmlessly passing beneath their targets. Others exploded too early, or didn't explode at all. Imagine stalking a German cruiser for hours, risking detection, calculating the perfect shot, only to watch your torpedo bounce off the hull like a rubber toy. And it happened, again and again. One frustrated captain reportedly said, "We're not fighting the enemy anymore, we're fighting our own equipment." The irony was brutal. Britain had built some of the finest submarines in the world, but the technology inside them hadn't kept up with reliability. Early torpedoes were mechanical marvels. Gyroscopes to steer, magnetic fuses meant to detect a ship's metal hull, and delicate depth control springs to hold a steady course. In calm waters and laboratory tests, they worked perfectly. In war, they often failed. When Germany invaded Norway in 1940, the Royal Navy discovered how badly things had gone wrong. British submarines fired dozens of torpedoes, almost none exploded properly. The Admiralty launched investigation after investigation, but pressure mounted and morale collapsed. This was more than embarrassing. It was deadly. Each failed torpedo exposed a submarine's position. German destroyers needed no second invitation. Sonar pings filled the air, depth charges thundered, and the sea boiled with shockwaves. Survivors described it as being inside a collapsing cathedral of metal. It's easy to understand why some commanders began taking desperate risks and even stranger ideas. When the odds looked impossible, British crews and engineers did something unconventional. They began to think creatively. In other words, they cheated, but cleverly. While engineers worked to fix the faulty torpedoes, a small group of officers and scientists asked a radical question. If our real torpedoes can't be trusted to destroy enemy ships, do we always need to destroy them? What if, instead of blowing the enemy apart, we could scare them away or trick them into believing they were already hit? That half-desperate, half-brilliant idea grew into one of the strangest naval projects of the war, a program to design a torpedo whose purpose was not to explode, but to deceive. The birth of the fake torpedo. Official files later called these devices exercise heads or training units, but among submarine crews, rumors spread of phantom torpedoes, weapons that were not weapons at all. Their original purpose was simple and practical. Submarines needed safe torpedoes for practice, reusable models that could be fired, tracked, and recovered. They looked and behaved like the real thing, but they carried no warhead. Then someone, no one knows exactly who, realized these training torpedoes could be used in combat for a darker aim. Because the scariest part of a torpedo is often not the explosion, but the wait before it explodes. When a German sonar operator heard the screaming approach of a torpedo, he did not pause to check whether it was armed. He shouted the warning, "All torpedo!" and the ship reacted instantly. Engines were reversed, alarms screamed, helmsmen swerved. In the confusion, ships sometimes collided, depth charges were dropped at random, and gunners fired at shadows. And sometimes, often enough, chaos was all the attacker needed. By late 1941, a group of officers at the Portsmouth Torpedo Experimental Establishment began asking a bold question. Could submarines use fake torpedoes as psychological weapons? Could a decoy make enemy ships retreat or panic entirely? The tests started quietly. Engineers modified practice torpedoes to behave like the real thing, adjusting propellers and adding small air cavities to produce the torpedo's signature screaming sound underwater. To a German sonar operator, there was no difference at all. The results? Astonishing. Even seasoned destroyer crews panicked during mock exercises. They reacted as if under actual attack. Engines reversed, alarms blared, ships turned sharply. One report noted, dryly, enemy behaved as expected under torpedo threat. In other words, the crews panicked exactly as planned. The problem of credibility. Not everyone in the Admiralty was convinced. Some senior officers thought the idea absurd. Are we really going to win the war with pretend weapons? One skeptic scoffed, but others, especially those who had faced combat firsthand, understood its potential. Britain was already a master of deception. Fake airfields, inflatable tanks, dummy equipment. Why not fake torpedoes too? Still, it raised tough questions. Could these phantom weapons actually change the outcome of battle, or were they just theater? To find out, the Navy decided to conduct a field trial. A small number of submarines would carry both real and dummy torpedoes, and captains were given permission to use the fakes at their discretion. No one knew exactly what would happen. Into the deep. The first operations picture it, a British submarine sliding beneath the cold North Sea. The periscope breaks the surface for a moment, just enough to spot a German convoy. Red instrument lights glow in the control room. The captain's face is tight with focus. He gives the order, fire tube 3. A blast of compressed air. A white trail cuts into the black water. Only this time the torpedo is not armed. It's hollow, a ghost weapon. Seconds later, chaos erupts on the surface. German lookouts shout, the convoy scatters. Destroyer peels off its station and rushes to intercept an attack that will never come. The British captain watches the confusion through the periscope, a faint, private smile crossing his face. He eases the boat down and slips away, not a single explosion. This wasn't about sinking ships directly. It was about controlling fear. Naval combat is as much mental as it is physical. One false alarm can break a convoy's discipline, slow supply runs, and force escorts to burn fuel and waste ammunition. Every attack, whether real or imagined, reminded German sailors that danger could come from the dark water at any moment. As one British intelligence officer put it, a weapon does not have to kill to be effective. It only needs to convince. And it worked, convincingly. German naval records later showed an increasing number of reports about multiple torpedo attacks, far more than British submarines could have possibly launched. Some ships even claimed they had been struck by torpedoes that never actually existed. Of course, submariners, like all sailors, had a dark sense of humor. They found ways to laugh at the absurdity of it all. One crew nicknamed their dummy torpedo the Bluffer. Another painted "boo" across its nose before firing it. When a German minesweeper reported being hit by one of these fake torpedoes, laughter spread across the mess decks. It was a small victory, but in the grim routine of submarine warfare, it mattered. A sailor wrote in his diary, "We may not blow them up, but we certainly ruin their day. What is real in war?" Here's a moment to pause and reflect. When does deception itself become a weapon? Is a torpedo only dangerous if it explodes, or is it just as deadly if the enemy believes it will? Modern warfare often blurs these lines, but this was one of the first times in history where psychology became its own kind of ammunition. By early 1943, reports were reaching London with a quiet sense of triumph. German convoys in certain areas were moving more cautiously, their speed reduced by as much as 30%. Anti-submarine escorts burned through precious fuel as they conducted evasive maneuvers. And most importantly, British submarines were surviving longer. One admiral noted in a classified report, "Enemy caution is the victory of our deception." Officially, the fake torpedo project remained a secret, but its influence was spreading across the fleet. Soon, dummy runs became standard procedure. Fire a fake torpedo, watch the convoy scatter, and then slip in with a real shot. It was warfare by misdirection, like a game of chess beneath the waves. But there was a problem. A fake torpedo could startle the enemy, but it couldn't finish them. Britain needed something more, a weapon that was both believable and deadly. In 1943, they got exactly that, a hybrid of illusion and lethality. A device so advanced that German scientists refused to believe it existed until it tore through their ships. The hidden innovation. They called it ingenuity. They called it necessity. Sometimes they even called it madness. Often, it was all three at once. What started as a crude psychological trick quickly became something far more dangerous, a deliberate fusion of illusion and engineering designed to fool both the eyes and ears of an enemy who trusted his instruments more than his instincts. This is where Act 2 begins, in workshops smelling of oil and ozone, in cramped labs where physicists and stokers argued over how to make a lie sound like death. If Act 1 showed the problem, broken torpedoes and a Navy pushed to the edge, Act 2 tells the story of the people who refused to accept defeat. Not polished admirals in shining boots, but engineers with grease under their nails, acoustic specialists with tape measures and oscilloscopes, and submarine captains whose field notes looked like maps to madness. These were men who believed that sound could be engineered, that a hull's vibrations could be mimicked, and that the human mind, trained to react instantly to a single shriek in the water, could be manipulated to deliver victory. The experiments happened in the most ordinary corners of Britain: naval bases, university labs, and makeshift workshops. Paper sketches were scattered across benches, each note blunt and practical. Must sound like a real torpedo at 200 yards, must not give away its position, must be recoverable if possible. There was no time to waste. Every day, convoys were being attacked. Every day, U-boats threatened Britain's supply lines. In peacetime, an idea like this might have taken months to develop. In war, it had to be built in weeks, or it wouldn't matter at all. The science of belief. At the heart of the project was a simple truth. Perception comes before action. When a destroyer's sonar picked up an incoming torpedo, decisions to turn, drop depth charges, or slow the convoy happened in a split second. Faster than debate. Faster than strategy. Biological instinct. The engineers weren't just trying to mimic a torpedo's path. They aimed to mimic its signature, the exact combination of speed, noise, and water turbulence that would convince enemy sailors and sensors that a lethal weapon was on the way. This demanded several breakthroughs. They had to create a propulsion system that matched the engine's acoustic frequency. They had to design a casing that produced the right kind of cavitation, the tiny pops and whistles made when metal slices through water. And they had to perfect depth control, keeping the device neither too shallow nor too deep. It wasn't easy. Early prototypes shot through the water like panicked trout, too fast, too loud, wrong in every way. Others were almost silent, slipping through the water without the shriek that sailors had come to recognize as death approaching. Some nights, the labs were tense and quiet. Men smoked in silence, staring at oscilloscopes that recorded failure after failure. Fists banged on benches. In wartime, there was no room for romantic engineering. If it worked, lives were saved. If it failed, men died. From dummy to deception, the hybrid torpedo. Small advances suddenly became a leap forward. Engineers began to build a hybrid, a torpedo-like device that could carry a small warhead, a real explosive, while hiding that danger behind layers of deception. In short, a weapon that could look harmless when needed or appear deadly when that helped the plan. Why would anyone want that? Because a device that looks fake can make the enemy relax. A device that sounds real can scatter escorts and open a window for a follow-up attack. The hybrid combined both advantages. First, it could act as a convincing decoy. Then, once the enemy's reaction was known, its hidden warhead could be triggered under controlled conditions. The engineering problem was enormous. A warhead takes space and weight, and both change the sound the device makes in water. Extra mass could muffle the noises the torpedo needed to produce. So teams came up with clever compromises. Segmented casings that held a small shaped charge in the nose, with hollow sections aft to preserve buoyancy and speed. They tried different materials, alloys, composites, special coatings, all to fine-tune the sounds the device made as it sliced through the sea. More than once, prototypes were launched at night from test submarines off rocky coasts. Crews slipped into the darkness, fired the devices, and waited. They logged sonar traces, argued in low voices, and sometimes cracked open a tin of bully beef to celebrate when a test finally produced the right scream at the right depth. The hybrid was no miracle. It was a gamble, a mechanical poker hand where engineers tried to hide their tell while convincing the enemy they held the winning card. But in war, a convincing bluff can be the difference between survival and annihilation. Human stories. Doubters, believers, and a captain's gamble. Behind every technical breakthrough were the people who made it real. One young acoustic scientist, a Cambridge graduate drafted into naval research, had to confront his own doubts. He had never been to sea. All his knowledge was theoretical. Yet, he spent nights aboard submarines, listening to the hull groan, watching sailors react to fleeting shadows. Those experiences taught him lessons no lab experiment ever could. Even in high places, there were skeptics. The Admiralty worried that deploying such devices might be a propaganda disaster if word got out. "We cannot afford to be seen as playground magicians," one senior officer wrote dryly. But the reports from captains told a different story. These devices created opportunities and often saved crews from being depth-charged into the brine. One captain, recorded in private logs simply as HMS, made a bold choice that would shape how the weapon was perceived. Surrounded by a screen of enemy escorts in the channel, his ammunition and fuel running low, he fired a hybrid device, not to destroy, but to scatter the enemy. The escorts reacted exactly as predicted. They chased phantom threats, leaving gaps in their formation. In that opening, the captain slipped through, saving the convoy behind him. It was a gamble, and for once, a gamble that paid off. Back on base, the captain was reprimanded for unauthorized use of experimental ordnance. The paperwork was a mess, but the men under his command were alive. In the margins of the report, the Admiralty quietly noted, "Tactical potential observed." War history often feels solemn, but don't imagine these labs as quiet, serious sanctuaries. When progress stalled, sailors and scientists turned to dark humor to stay sane. One engineer soldered a tiny brass bell to a failed prototype, sending a photo with the caption, "Too cheery, try again." Another submarine crew drew a cartoon of a torpedo wearing a mask, labeled "The Decoy, Master of Disguise." These jokes weren't disrespectful. They were survival, a brief escape from fear, a moment to laugh before returning to the deadly work of making war sound believable. Testing under fire. By mid-1942, the hybrids were ready for real operations. But the first missions were tense. Submarine captains, practical men who trusted their own instincts more than any gadget, needed convincing. Their reasoning was simple. Any device that put the boat at extra risk would be rejected outright. So the engineers added fail-safes. The hybrid's warhead could only arm after a precise sequence of checks, and it could be jettisoned immediately if the submarine needed to dive in a hurry. The first combat launches were at night, in waters where the Royal Navy had only partial control. Crews described the moments as surreal. The silence of the sea, the hiss of compressed air, the torpedo slipping into the black water. Then came the waiting, the unbearable pause where fate balanced on a knife's edge. And then came the reaction. Fast, chaotic, just as predicted. Escorts dropped depth charges in the wrong places, crews miscalculated, and convoys fractured. In some cases, a live torpedo fired silently after the decoy had done its work, hitting a distracted ship. These results weren't perfect, but they were progress. A hybrid that persuaded a ship to change course could create the conditions for a real torpedo to strike. Sometimes the hybrid itself, if carefully armed, delivered the final blow. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't clean, but it was effective. Or do they? No deception lasts forever if the enemy can learn from it. The Admiralty knew it, so did the engineers. But learning costs time. New tactics, training, and equipment aren't rolled out overnight. German reports began noting suspiciously consistent acoustic signatures. U-boat commanders were ordered to be more wary. Yet even the Germans weren't immune to human instinct. In the tension of combat, in the darkness, a shriek in the water forces a decision. And the mind, in those moments, craves certainty. And certainty often means action. The ever-evolving hybrids. The hybrids didn't stay the same for long. Each time the Germans grew suspicious, British engineers responded with subtle innovations, new materials, adjustments to propeller pitch, advanced muffling techniques. Their goal wasn't just to trick machines, it was to fool human instincts. This back and forth became the heartbeat of deception. Every enemy countermeasure sparked a new British tweak. It wasn't an arms race of guns or shells, but of sound signatures and split-second reactions. The moral dilemma. But deception isn't just a technical challenge, it's an ethical one. Can manipulating an enemy's mind be considered lesser evil than direct violence? British commanders often argued yes, if fewer lives were lost through clever tricks, then the tactic was justified. Yet the cost was never purely physical. Crews sometimes thought themselves safe when they weren't. Captains wrestled with feelings of compromised honor. And above it all, loomed a foggy question. What really counts as legitimate warfare? A naval chaplain once wrote in a private letter, "We teach our men to be brave, then we teach them to lie." That line haunted many in the Admiralty, even as field reports continued to celebrate the hybrid's tactical value. The turning point. From experiment to doctrine. By late 1943, the hybrid devices had moved beyond mere curiosity. They were officially adopted into doctrine, referenced in classified memos, and integrated into production lines. Submarine crews now received formal briefings on when to deploy a decoy versus a live torpedo. Tactical manuals were updated with new protocols for combining deception with attack. This shift from experimental novelty to standard tactic speaks volumes. The Royal Navy had made a strategic decision to weaponize doubt itself. They had turned the enemy's trust in their instruments into a vulnerability and then perfected a tool to exploit it. Cliffhanger to Act 3, yet the ultimate test still lay ahead. The real proof of the hybrid's value wouldn't come from labs or training exercises, but from brutal combat against an enemy that was clever, adaptive, and unforgiving. Would the hybrids continue to work once every German tactic had been sharpened by experience? Could the British maintain the pace of innovation as the enemy scrambled to counter them? And, perhaps most dangerously, what new ethical and strategic risks would emerge once deception became routine? Act 3 will answer these questions in blood and steel, showing how these devices were deployed in major operations, how the Germans responded, and what the hidden cost of winning through illusion truly was. Prepare for confrontations at sea where sound itself becomes a weapon, where a captain's split-second decision determines life or death, and where the line between real and fake collapses under pressure. The deception at sea, the calm before the chaos. By 1944, the Royal Navy's submarine service had become a strange paradox, stronger than ever, yet haunted by the ghosts of its own inventions. Across the North Sea, German convoys still moved toward Norway and Denmark, carrying iron, fuel, and supplies vital to a shrinking Reich. Each convoy was a tense game of nerves. Every sonar ping, every ripple on the periscope lens could signal the start of another deadly underwater duel. But now, British submarines carried something new in their tubes. Not just torpedoes, but ideas. Machines designed to think like humans, to mislead, to tempt, to trick. Commanders gathered in dimly lit rooms, maps spread before them, and were told, use them as you see fit. The fewer who know, the better. The Admiralty wanted no fanfare. Secrecy itself was a weapon. In February 1944, HMS Scepter hunted a German supply convoy off the Barents coast. The sea was steel gray, the light faint and cold like an old black and white film. At periscope depth, Commander Ian McIntosh spotted 3 cargo ships under destroyer escort. A direct attack was impossible. The water was too shallow for a safe escape. He gave the order, prepare 2 hybrids, one real, one a decoy. At 900 yards, the fakes shot from the tubes first. Their propellers screamed through the water, sounding exactly like live torpedoes. Immediately, the escorts reacted. Sonar operators shouted bearings, depth charges were readied. Chaos erupted, but McIntosh did not flee. He waited, and in the confusion, he fired 2 live torpedoes down the corridor the Germans had abandoned. Moments later, Thuringen, a 5,000-ton transport, erupted in flames. The escorts realized their mistake and dropped charges into empty water while Scepter slipped away unseen. The after-action report was concise. Use of deception device successful. Enemy reaction violent, misdirected. Primary target destroyed. For the Admiralty, it was proof at last. Deception could kill. Fear as ammunition. Word spread quietly across the fleet. Submariners, a superstitious lot, began giving nicknames to their hybrid torpedoes. Gremlin, Whisper, the Phantom. Some believed the devices carried luck. Others whispered they carried the devil. What truly mattered, however, were the results. German convoys slowed. Escort formations grew tighter. And intercepted radio chatter revealed a growing anxiety among enemy crews. One decoded message from a German destroyer captain read, "Enemy torpedoes multiply like ghosts. We hear 1, then 10, then none. Crew exhausted from constant false alarms." Every false alarm was, in effect, a victory. Fear itself had become a weapon, invisible, inexhaustible, and devastating. A war of wires and echoes. By spring 1944, the Germans responded with countermeasures. They deployed new sonar filters to distinguish real engine noises from the fake ones. Crews were trained to spot patterns in attack timing and resist reflexive maneuvers. But British engineers were listening too. They intercepted reports, adjusted the hybrids, and added subtle randomness, small variations that made each decoy slightly unpredictable. No two sounded exactly alike. Some rattled faintly, some pulsed irregularly, as if compensating for imagined faults. The sea itself became a theater of confusion, noise, and nerves. Meanwhile, real torpedoes were improving. The long-troubled Mark VIII became more reliable and magnetic detonators were refined. Deception and lethality merged into one seamless doctrine: confuse first, strike second, vanish always. The Battle of Utsira Sound. The greatest test came in the summer of 1944 near Norway's Utsira Sound. A German task group, destroyers and merchant ships, attempted to retreat after Allied air raids. Waiting for them was HMS Trenchant, under Lieutenant Commander Arthur Heslett. Heslett had studied the reports on the hybrid's success. He knew they could do more than distract. They could herd the enemy, forcing ships into predictable paths. At dawn, he fired 3 fake torpedoes spaced 30 seconds apart, each angled slightly differently. The escorts detected multiple torpedoes and panicked, swinging hard to starboard to avoid them. Exactly as Heslett hoped, the convoy moved straight in his firing line. Then came the real salvo. 2 live torpedoes hit the lead transport squarely amidships. A third crippled an escort. In just 7 minutes, the attack was over. The convoy burned from bow to stern. Heslett surfaced only long enough to confirm the hits through his periscope and then slipped silently back into the deep. His log entry was typically British. The devices behaved beautifully. The enemy did not. Humor in the abyss. After missions like Utsira, crews celebrated with wry jokes. Next time, let's just record ourselves shouting boo down the tube. Even in victory, humor was more than a pastime. It was a defense mechanism, a way to keep terror at bay. But beneath the laughter lay something darker. The realization that no one, not even the attacker, could fully control what happened next. Deception was unpredictable. It could backfire. A mistimed launch might reveal a submarine's position. A dud torpedo could still be traced. Several British boats barely escaped after their own decoys betrayed their course. The line between clever strategy and reckless gamble was razor thin. Collateral consequences. By late 1944, Allied intelligence intercepted troubling reports. German destroyers dropping depth charges in empty water, merchant crews abandoning ships after hearing phantom torpedoes, even collisions between panicked escorts. Some British officers felt a pang of guilt. One wrote privately, "They fight shadows now. We made the sea itself their enemy." Others argued that the chaos actually saved lives. Frightened ships were easier to avoid or capture, and fewer battles were fought head-on. But war rarely rewards reflection. Success outweighed scruples. Orders came down to continue using hybrids where operationally advantageous. In the cold calculus of total war, deception had proven a cost-effective weapon. The final year, D-Day and beyond. When the Normandy invasion began in June 1944, deception played a crucial role, not only on land but beneath the sea. While fake landing craft and inflatable tanks fooled German reconnaissance above water, British submarines used hybrids to misdirect U-boats patrolling the channel approaches. Every phantom torpedo fired drew attention away from the vulnerable convoys ferrying men and machines to France. By the end of that summer, Allied command quietly considered the decoy torpedo operations a success. They would never make headlines, but in confidential naval minutes, officers noted, "Acoustic deception has materially aided in the preservation of the invasion fleet." The hybrids' quiet triumph. By the end of the war, the hybrids had done their work. Their existence would remain a secret for decades, what the Germans believed. When Germany surrendered in 1945, Allied analysts interviewed captured naval officers. Many swore that the British had developed a strange new weapon, a self-multiplying torpedo, one that could split, replicate, or confuse sonar beyond comprehension. It sounds impossible today, but to men exhausted by months of false alarms and sleepless patrols, it felt terrifyingly real. Perhaps the ultimate victory wasn't a battle won, but reality itself rewritten. For years, records of the hybrid torpedo remained classified. Engineers returned home, to universities, to industry, carrying memories of nights when calculations became phantoms, capable of frightening entire fleets. When the files were finally declassified decades later, historians were astonished. The entries were sparse, just enough to confirm that Britain had weaponized illusion beneath the waves. A whisper that shaped the sea. One surviving engineer, interviewed in the 1970s, chuckled softly when asked if the devices actually sank ships. "Sometimes," he said. "They didn't need to. The ocean did that for us. We only gave it a whisper to start with." what it all meant. The heart of this story isn't in the technology, it's in the idea. The British submariners using fake torpedoes weren't just battling machines, they were fighting uncertainty itself. They discovered that under pressure, the line between courage and deception can vanish, and that the mind's reaction to fear can be as decisive as explosives. In many ways, these fake torpedoes marked the birth of a new kind of warfare, one fought as much in perception as in physics. From radar jamming to cyber operations today, the principle remains the same. Control the enemy's mind and you control the battlefield. Yet there was a cost. Every deception, no matter how clever, eroded a bit of the moral clarity soldiers hold dear. One submariner, long after the war, admitted that he sometimes dreamed of phantom torpedoes chasing him. You can trick a man once, he said, but you can't unteach him to fear what isn't there. A moment of humanity. Picture one of these crews surfacing after an attack. The dawn is pale, the sea dotted with oil slicks and wreckage. No cheers, no triumph, just sheer exhaustion. A young sailor passes around a tin mug of tea. Someone cracks a dry joke about ghost weapons and they all laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it keeps them human. Then they dive again, vanishing back into the same gray ocean that had almost swallowed them just hours before. Quiet, tense, unresolved. That's what victory looked like beneath the waves. The legacy of illusion. Decades later, naval strategists studying the campaign coined a term, cognitive warfare. They traced its roots not to satellites or computers, but to those wartime hybrid torpedoes. The British had learned a vital lesson. The mind is the ultimate battlefield. Every modern stealth aircraft, every decoy flare, every radar spoof owes a debt to that desperate British innovation. When you can't outgun the enemy, outthink him. When you can't build a better weapon, build a better illusion. The final reflection. So, the next time someone tells you war is simply a contest of firepower, remember the story of the fake torpedo, a machine that wasn't meant to kill, but did. A trick that turned fear into force. A testament to the strange genius that emerges when survival demands imagination. The oceans still hold many secrets from that era. Some lie rusting on the seabed, others drift invisibly through history, echoing faintly in every new technology born of deception. But one truth remains, as clear as the silence after an attack. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one that never explodes.